When I first heard about Hellblade over a year ago, it was being touted as Ninja Theory's love letter to one of their older games, Heavenly Sword, which got me immediately interested because I'm personally a huge fan of Ninja Theory games, and I liked Heavenly Sword. There seems to be some conflicting reports, with some articles claiming it is and some claiming it is not a spiritual successor to the 2007 PS3 exclusive, but it's hard to not notice similarities in presentation to Heavenly Sword. Hellblade focuses on a character, Senua, who looks more than a little similar to Kai, many people's favorite character in Heavenly Sword. The time period and setting appear to be similar, and even the titles seem to be nudging you to think it's a sequel. Heaven, Hell, Sword, Blade, you get the idea. But once I finally got a chance to boot up Hellblade myself, I quickly discovered that this is not a typical action game or a typical Ninja Theory game, and despite some superficial parallels, this is not Heavenly Sword at all. Hellblade is, first and foremost, a dark and mysterious journey through a deeply disturbed woman's struggle with her own mental illness and past trauma, and it's as refreshing as it is divergent from other games. Senua, the protagonist, is a Celtic warrior and the apparent survivor of a devastating encounter between her tribe and savage Vikings. From the get-go, bleakness and desperation are everywhere. The moody and dreary style penetrates every aspect of the game with purpose and commitment, so much so that normal visual devices like health bars, objective markers, and tutorials and button prompts have all been forsaken in favor of a more engrossing and captivating experience for the player. This is a welcomed approach for me, as I tend to prefer when a game gives me some space to figure things out instead of breaking away from the experience to hold my hand and guide me through it. Senua's character is unlike most that I've come across in games. She's profoundly fractured mentally and emotionally, and from the first moment of the game, it becomes extremely apparent that she's in a very bad place. Voices and visions haunt her at every turn, and as she struggles to determine what is and isn't real, the psychological issues manifest themselves in some disturbing ways, and at times, it actually makes Hellblade feel more like a horror game than an action game. Even the combat is soaked with so much dread and tension that I found myself gripping the controller and getting startled, as if I was playing through a section of Silent Hill or Amnesia.
He's gone!
Speaking of combat, I think Ninja Theory did a great job here, offering some very intimate and visceral fights. The controls for combat should be mostly familiar to anyone that's played an action game of this type in the last 10 years or so, yet there is enough nuance to them that it still encourages some practice to perfect parrying different enemies and timing heavy attacks just right. These combat sections might feel a little constrained since your movement is locked to an enemy at all times. This does set Hellblade's combat apart from typical action games by making it far more personal, and I appreciate that. However, this can also open you up to attacks from behind if an enemy spawns behind you at the right time, and if you combine that with there being no visual indicator to illustrate which enemy you're locked onto at any given time, it can provide some confusion. 90% of the time, it won't present a problem, but occasionally, especially later in the game, when there are multiple enemies in front of you, it can create some confusion. But I will say that if you're paying attention and you're listening to the more helpful of Senua's voices, you'll usually be able to figure out what to do and you'll prevail in most situations. The enemy variety might be a bit lacking for some as well, but I found them to be so well designed and well suited for the tone of the game that the fact that there was only a handful of different types didn't really bother me at all. Now, it's worth noting that physical altercations are not the centerpiece of the game like you might expect. Rather, combat shares the stage with optical illusion puzzles and storytelling sections, all of which are distributed pretty evenly and done very well, even though you may sense a pattern with them early on.
Coming back for me.
One of the areas Hellblade really shines the most is the sound design, with ominous tones and chords making up most of the score. There are moments where you'll notice an eerie melody come through, but those moments are very few and far between, which is great because those moments are made more impactful by their rarity. That goes a really long way to create some big, harrowing scenes.
Through his darkness you will find him. In your sword still beats a heart. You fought for love unspoilt by your darkness within.
The voices that haunt Senua are nearly constant. Some are encouraging and offer tips on how to proceed, whereas others are foreboding and demoralizing and simply serve to add to Senua's misery. Clearly lots of effort and time went into perfecting Hellblade's sound design, and I can't stress enough the benefit of playing it with a decent pair of headphones, if you really want to dive into it. Visually, the game is right on par with nearly any AAA game you're going to play this year, with even the most compromised version of Hellblade on the regular PS4 looking impressive and easily mistakable for a $60 AAA game that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make. The special effects you'll see throughout illustrate schizophrenic hallucinations probably about as well as any video game could ever hope to do, with squirming shadows, warping lens flares, and various other tricks to keep you feeling uneasy and on edge. More subtle aspects, like the lighting and the tone, are maybe more important here though, stylistically coming together to form a look and a feel that reminds me of the excellent movie The Revenant. So if you like the visual tone of Hellblade, I would say watch The Revenant for sure, and vice versa. The gameplay, sound, and visuals all come together in such a cohesive and deliberate way in Hellblade, and as a result, it forms the most thematically gripping game I've played in a long time. It's bleak, it's depressing, but it pulls all of this off in a beautiful way, much like 2013's The Last of Us. The combination of raw talent at Ninja Theory and having a smaller team and therefore running their concept through less filters seems to have definitely paid off here. That development style might not be right for every project, but I do hope that all major developers still take notice of Hellblade and see that there is great value in not having too many chefs in the kitchen. Ninja Theory has indeed accomplished what they set out to do by making a great game with a small team and a relatively small budget. They deserve applause for that alone. But performance and cost effectiveness aside, you also still have a really special experience here that stands on its own 2 feet. Hellblade strikes at some very delicate issues that we as a society find difficult to talk about, much less play through in a video game. And it does so with grace and passion and focus. The few complaints that I do have are ultimately completely overwhelmed by how well the story, tone, and gameplay all come together to form a timeless, moving experience. Hellblade unapologetically embraces what it is, it transcends genre, and in my opinion stands firmly among the best games I've ever played.